Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into something that, can be super frustrating in healthcare. Why do smart, dedicated people so often push back against changes that are supposed to make things better? We're going to diagnose this whole thing and treat resistance not as some kind of failure, but as a vital sign.
So let's start with a question that kind of flips the script. We usually see resistance as a problem, right? A bug in the system that we need to fix. But what if it's not a bug at all? What if it's actually a feature? Maybe an immune response, telling us that a new change might actually be doing more harm than good to the organization.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the symptom itself, what resistance actually is. Then, we'll diagnose the root causes, from the very human element to the cracks in the system. And finally, we'll get to the prescription for change and what the long-term prognosis looks like. Okay, first up, we have to frame this problem the right way. Resistance isn't just some annoying hurdle to jump over. In the incredibly complex world of healthcare, it is often the main barrier to any kind of transformation. And understanding why it's there, well, that's the whole key. So here's the big idea. Resistance isn't just people being stubborn or emotional. A lot of the time, it's a completely rational response. Think about it like a set of scales. On one side, you've got a new idea, but on the other, you have the immense weight of years of clinical experience and the messy reality of patient care. When that new idea feels flimsy compared to what they know works, pushback is the most logical thing in the world. So, let's dive into our first diagnosis. This one is all about the human side of things, the really personal stuff that ties into the professional identity of the people on the front lines. At the very core of being a doctor or nurse is this idea of clinical autonomy, the ability to use all your training and expertise to make the best call for the person in front of you. So when a new standardized protocol comes down the pipe, it can feel like a direct attack on that professional judgment. It doesn't feel like an improvement. It feels like you're being told to just follow a script. And this really lays it all out. On one hand, you've got this sort of assembly line mindset, with new protocols all about efficiency. But on the other hand, you have the mindset of a gardener, carefully tending to each unique patient. Well, resistance is what grows in that gap between the process and the person. And then you layer this on top of everything else. Just pure exhaustion. Healthcare professionals are dealing with a constant flood of changes. New tech, new rules, new metrics. This nonstop pressure leads to a very real condition called change fatigue.
Now, this is so important to get. These aren't signs of a bad attitude. They're symptoms of a system that is completely overwhelmed. When people start rolling their eyes and calling a new initiative just another program, it's not because they're cynical. It's a defense mechanism. It's how you save that last little bit of energy when you're already running on fumes.
Okay, let's move on to our second diagnosis. Now we're going to zoom out a little bit, from the individual person to the organization itself, and look at the cracks in the foundation that make any kind of change feel impossible. It really all comes down to one word: trust. If past changes were rolled out in a clumsy way, or maybe just abandoned halfway through, or if they felt like orders from on high with zero input from the people actually doing the work, well, that history creates a lot of skepticism. And without trust, even the best idea is basically dead on arrival. This quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling of being told something is mission critical, but then not getting the tools or the time or the support to actually pull it off. You feel like you're being set up to fail. That's not just a communication problem, it's a fundamental break in trust. And visually, this is what it looks like. It's the capacity gap. On one side, you have the mountain of daily work demands, and on the other, this tiny little sliver of time that's supposedly for learning a whole new system. You're asking people to pour from a cup that's already bone dry. At that point, resistance isn't an opinion, it's just math. And remember, all of this is happening in a system that is already under incredible pressure. You've got staffing shortages, crazy levels of burnout, tight budgets, and on top of all that, a culture that is, for very good reasons, extremely careful about taking risks, because patient safety is everything. Any new change has to fight its way through all of that. So, we've looked at the problem from a few different angles now. The big question is, what do we do about it? What's the treatment plan? How can leaders actually guide change in a way that helps, instead of just making things worse? So how do you fix this? Well, there's no magic wand, but the source material gives us a pretty clear and practical 3-part prescription. Each one of these steps is designed to rebuild that trust and get the buy-in you need for any real change to stick. First things first, you've got to find your champions. These are the respected nurses and doctors from within the ranks who speak the same language as their colleagues. They're like translators, turning the leadership's big picture vision into something that makes sense on the floor and making sure the plan is actually practical. They bring a level of credibility that you just can't get from a memo.
Second, and you can't skip this one, you have to back up your words with actual support. Resources are the clearest sign that an organization is serious. This means protected time for training, making sure the tech works, having enough staff on hand. It shows you're actually invested in your people's success, not just in ticking a box on a project plan.
And last but not least, communication. And look, this isn't about sending more emails. This is about starting a real dialogue. You have to be crystal clear about why the change is happening. You have to listen to people's concerns. And most importantly, you have to involve them in the planning. That's how you build a real sense of shared ownership.
All right, let's bring this all home. After we've diagnosed the issue and we've laid out the treatment, what's the long-term goal here? What's the really big shift in thinking that needs to happen?
This right here is the whole point. The goal isn't to just steamroll resistance, it's to listen to it. Once you understand that the pushback is coming from a real place, concerns about patient safety, about having enough time to do the job right, it stops being an obstacle and it turns into incredibly valuable feedback.
I mean, think about it like this. Resistance is like a vital sign for your organization. You know, if a patient has a high fever, you don't just tell them to stop having a fever. You figure out what's causing it. It's the same thing here. Widespread resistance is a sign that your plan might be flawed, or underfunded, or even dangerous. Ignoring that sign isn't just bad leadership, it's organizational malpractice. And so we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. What if instead of trying to quiet down the loudest critics, we started seeing them as the people who are actually the most engaged? What if their resistance, which comes from deep expertise and a sense of responsibility, actually holds the key to making a good idea a truly great one?